As this video begins, a title appears. Designing for Accessibility from the Beginning. The audio description in this video is spoken by Kevin, a computer-generated voice. Two women appear in split screen, each speaking from their home offices. On the right, Arkansas Adult Learning Resource Center Disabilities Coordinator, Wendy Bryant, a black woman with her hair in a bun, and wearing geometric glasses, and beaded hoop earrings. On the left, CAST Educational Research Scientist, Amanda Bastoni, a white woman with long hair and colorful striped earrings. Now, Wendy.
Hey Amanda. So in our other videos, we learned what accessibility is, and we also heard some examples of how it's used in technology. But when do designers need to start thinking about accessibility?
That's a really important question, Wendy. The answer makes all the difference as designers, from teachers to product developers, are trying to make learning accessible for everyone. So let's hear from some folks with some experience around this question.
Text. Build in accessibility from the start. Now, Wendy Daniels, RIT, National Technical Institute for the Deaf, Associate Research Professor. As Wendy signs, the voice of an unseen interpreter accompanies.
People often develop a concept, which is very exciting, but they may forget about accessibility along the way, or they may think that they can add it in later. But in fact, adding in accessibility at the end makes it more difficult and more complicated to do. Next,
Luis Perez, National AIM Center, CAST, Technical Assistance Specialist.
So one of the ways that I explain the mindset that you need to bring into accessibility is by using the analogy of baking a muffin. And the analogy is that you don't just take a plain muffin and drop a bunch of blueberries on top and call it a blueberry muffin. You actually have to mix those blueberries into the batter. So even before you put the muffin into the oven and bake it, you need to take some proactive steps if what you really want to end up with is a blueberry muffin. And that's the same with accessibility. You can't just put it in at the end. It can't be part of your quality assurance process. It has to be there from the beginning and has to be built into each step of your production process.
Unajada, podcast host and executive producer, Boston, MA.
Making something inclusive from the beginning is just going to make your own life so much easier later on, or whoever is fixing the program later on, it's going to make their life so much easier. And maybe most importantly, it doesn't make the life of sighted people who are using it any worse.
Text. Universal Design for Learning. Again, Wendy and Amanda.
Okay, so I get the point. We need to design for accessibility from the start, but how do we do that exactly?
Another great question. Basically, to avoid retrofitting designs later, we need a way to proactively design for accessibility. CAST pioneered Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, as a framework to do just that. The concept comes out of universal design and architecture. Think about things like curb cuts and ramps that are usable by everyone, from pedestrians to wheelchair users to people pushing or pulling carts or even baby strollers.
Right. Building a ramp instead of a flight of stairs is both proactive and inclusive.
Exactly, and learning more about Universal Design for Learning will help us apply these concepts and proactive approaches in any other learning environment.
Sam Johnston, Director of Post-Secondary and Workforce Development, CAST.
So Universal Design for Learning is a framework that's based on many fields that together make up the learning sciences. And it's really focused on designing from the beginning with a broader range of learners in mind. So not anticipating that everybody's going to interact or understand things in the same ways, but that they're going to need different ways of accessing the information, of engaging with it, of engaging with one another, of wanting to show up in the first place. Accessibility is really our floor. So if you imagine kind of building a house, you're not going to build a house without a good foundation, right? Accessibility is really about, can they access the environment? Can they understand the materials we're giving them?
Now, Luis.
Another thought is that the barriers are in the environment rather than the person. And so that we can design for those barriers, we can be proactive in our design if we come into it with that mindset that there is variability and that a one-size-fits-all solution, it's not going to work. We need to create flexible solutions that allow people to customize and personalize how they use the environment to accomplish their goals.
Icons and phone interfaces are illustrated and placed on a mock-up. Now, Lynn McCormack, Senior Technologist, CAST.
So when we're building applications or websites, I really think about all of my users' capacity all the time. That means I think about whether they can see or not see. Can they hear or not hear? Do they have the capacity for mobility? Can they move their hands? Can they interact with the application? And I also really critically think about their capacity for cognition. Are they at grade level, below grade level, struggling? And making sure that my application, our applications here at CAST really meet the needs of all of those users. That's my definition of accessibility.
Text. Design considerations. Now, Luis.
One of the things that people are really paying attention to, and I'm really happy to see that, is the idea of cognitive accessibility and thinking about not just accessibility in terms of supporting technology and making sure that content is compatible with a range of technologies, but also how easy is it to use? What is the cognitive load of using this technology? Does it require to go through too many steps to get the benefit that you're after? So there is a big overlap between accessibility and usability, even though there are different concepts, but there is a lot that they can do to inform each other.
Matt Kaplowitz, Bridge Multimedia CEO and Chief Creative Officer.
6 or 7% of all men are colorblind. So what does that mean as far as color choices? In the case of autism, because many individuals on the spectrum are concrete thinkers, it then means that the language that we use, the scripting that we use, the way things are explained are based on concrete language. Another element of that is many people on the spectrum, as well as individuals with dyslexia, with attention deficit disorder, get overwhelmed. It gets to a point where they just go on overload. So keeping the design clean, keeping the visual space clean, keeping it to a point that everything is understandable is important.
Lynn.
Are there ways in which we can streamline the page? Are there ways that we can offer a different view that hides something so folks can maintain their focus? Being able to check the language level is actually pretty easy. You can do it right within Microsoft Word. And it's really in the context of thinking about students with cognitive differences. So why not, though, make things like the instructions as easy as possible for a student to use or a learner to use?
Text. The poor model. Now, Cynthia Curry, Project Director, National AIM Center, CAST.
So as you're thinking about entry points into accessibility and thinking about what does it mean in my setting, the POUR model is a good place to start. And it stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So when you think about perceivable, you're thinking about, can everyone see, hear, and or feel the information? When it comes to operable, if you have students who need assistive technology, are they able to use the material, the technology that's been chosen at the same time as everybody else? Is it understandable? You could think about plain language, making sure that everybody can understand and that the simplest language that's necessary can be used for your audience. And then robust means that the accessibility that's built into the material or technology, the standards that are followed to make sure that that accessibility holds across the wide variety of devices that a student or a learner may use.
A video montage. Students type on a color-contrasted laptop, plug in a USB, and use a Braille display. Now, Luis.
So those standards are there for conformance, but we want to go beyond conformance so that we're not just addressing technical accessibility, but practical accessibility. And that's accessibility at the level of the user. And it's not just checking a box on a checklist that says this is accessible, but can a person with a disability actually use the technology to accomplish their goal? And so that requires manual testing. That requires working with people with disabilities to get their feedback, to see how they use the technology, and then that can inform the design so that we're actually addressing people's needs and we're not just checking a box for accessibility.
Text appears. Find out more at aim.cast.org. Logos. CAST. National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. Galdo's Pictures, and Bridge Multimedia, empowering accessibility. Ideas that work. U.S. Office of Special Education Programs. Disclaimer. The contents of this video were developed under a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Education, grant number H327Z190004. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Project Officer Rebecca Sheffield, Ph.D.